The old hunting rifle looked like a museum piece, its wooden stock scarred from decades of use, the scope so ancient that seasoned marksmen laughed when they saw it. But when Sarah Chun lined up that impossible mile-long shot through swirling mountain winds, those same men fell silent as her bullet found its mark with surgical precision. What they didn't know was that the quiet woman they'd been mocking all morning had once held the record for the longest confirmed kill in military history. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The morning mist clung to the Rocky Mountain foothills like a shroud, masking the contours of the terrain that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Sarah Chun pulled her battered Chevy pickup into the gravel parking lot of Precision Ridge Shooting Range, the truck's engine coughing once before settling into silence. Through her windshield, she could see clusters of men in expensive tactical gear unloading cases of gleaming firearms, their conversations punctuated by boastful laughter and the metallic click of precision instruments. She sat for a moment, watching them through eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. Her fingers traced the steering wheel unconsciously, a nervous habit she'd developed since returning to civilian life 3 years ago. The calluses on her hands told stories she couldn't share, memories carved into flesh through countless hours of training that officially never happened. From the passenger seat, she lifted a worn canvas case that looked like it had survived 2 world wars. The fabric was faded green, patched in several places with military-issue tape, and bore no manufacturer's logo or tactical branding. Inside lay her grandfather's hunting rifle, a bolt-action Winchester Model 70 that he'd carried through the mountains of Colorado for 40 years, before passing it down to her. The rifle itself was a study in functional simplicity. The wooden stock bore the honest scars of decades in the wilderness, each nick and scratch a testament to countless hunting trips and target practice sessions. The metal had been worn smooth by patient hands, developing a patina that spoke of careful maintenance rather than neglect. Most tellingly, the scope mounted on top looked like something from a different era entirely. The Leupold scope had been state-of-the-art in 1985, but compared to the computerized optics favored by modern shooters, it might as well have been telescope from the Civil War. No digital readouts, no ballistic calculators, no range-finding capabilities. Just glass, crosshairs, and the kind of mechanical precision that required a shooter to actually understand physics rather than rely on electronic assistance. Sarah knew every quirk of that scope by heart. She knew that it pulled slightly left at distances beyond 800 yards, that the elevation knobs stuck at exactly 12 clicks, and that the crosshairs had been replaced twice in the decades since her grandfather first mounted it. She also knew that in the right hands, it was capable of precision that would make modern equipment seem redundant. The shooting range sprawled across 50 acres of carefully maintained terrain, offering everything from 25-yard pistol bays to the crown jewel of the facility, a mile-long rifle range that challenged even the most experienced marksman. On weekends, it attracted a specific type of shooter, men who measured their worth in the precision of their equipment and the length of their shots. As Sarah approached the check-in building, she passed groups of shooters preparing for what the range called its monthly long-distance challenge. The informal competition drew participants from across 3 states, each hoping to prove their mastery of extreme range shooting. Prize money wasn't the draw. Bragging rights were. The conversation she overheard painted a familiar picture. Discussions of bullet grain weights, ballistic coefficients, and atmospheric conditions delivered with the authority of men who had read extensively about subjects they'd rarely practiced. They spoke of their custom rifles like surgeons discussing scalpels, each modification and upgrade a badge of expertise. Marcus Webb held court near the equipment tables, his voice carrying across the parking lot as he explained the intricacies of his latest acquisition. The rifle case at his feet contained what he proudly announced was $30,000 worth of precision engineering. A custom-built .338 Lapua Magnum topped with a Schmidt and Bender scope that could allegedly read. License plates at a mile. Webb owned 3 gun stores across Colorado and sponsored several competitive shooters. His presence at the range served dual purposes: genuine enthusiasm for long range shooting and excellent marketing for his business. He was the kind of man who never missed an opportunity to educate others about the superiority of his equipment and, by extension, his expertise. "You see, gentlemen," Webb explained to his gathered audience, "extreme range shooting is about precision at every level. The rifle, the scope, the ammunition, even the bipod. Every component must be engineered for perfection. There's no room for compromise when you're trying to put lead on target at a mile plus." His gaze fell on Sarah as she walked past, her canvas case slung over one shoulder like a gym bag. The contrast was impossible to ignore. His audience wore tactical clothing that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, while Sarah looked like she was heading to a casual day at the gun range in worn jeans and a faded flannel shirt. "That's the problem with this sport," Webb continued, his voice pitched to Carrie. "Too many people think they can show up with their grandfather's deer rifle and compete with serious equipment. It's like bringing a horse to a Formula One race." Sarah heard the comment but didn't react, continuing toward the check-in counter. With the practiced indifference of someone who had learned to let words bounce off like rain on a windshield. She'd heard variations of the same sentiment countless times since returning to civilian shooting sports. The range officer, a weathered man named Jim Santos, looked up from his paperwork as she approached. Santos had been running Precision Ridge for 15 years and had seen every type of shooter imaginable. He prided himself on being able to read people, to distinguish between genuine marksmen and weekend warriors with deep pockets. "Morning, Sarah," Santos said, his greeting carrying the warmth reserved for regular customers. "Here for the long-range bays again?" "The mile range, if it's available," she replied, setting her case on the counter. "I'd like to try the 1,000-yard targets today." Santos raised an eyebrow. In the 3 years Sarah had been coming to Precision Ridge, she'd gradually worked her way up through the distance markers. She'd started at 300 yards, then 500, then 800. Each step up had been methodical, patient, without the bravado that usually accompanied such progression. "1,000 yards is serious business," Santos said, not unkindly. "Especially with that old Winchester of yours. Most folks need some pretty specialized equipment to reach out that far consistently." Behind her, Sarah heard Webb's conversation pause. She could feel eyes turning in her direction, the kind of attention that made her skin crawl, but had become unavoidable whenever she pushed beyond the informal boundaries that others had established for her. "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "I've been working up to it for a while now. Just want to see what the rifle can do." Santos studied her for a moment, then shrugged. He'd learned not to question his customers' ambitions too heavily, especially when they paid their range fees, without complaint and never caused trouble. Bay 12 is open. The wind's picking up from the southwest at about 8 to 10 miles per hour. Targets are fresh as of this morning. As Sarah signed the waiver and paid her fees, Webb's group had migrated closer to the counter. The conversation had shifted from equipment specifications to barely concealed amusement at what they clearly viewed as misplaced confidence. "1,000 yards with a hunting rifle," someone muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "Some people just don't understand the physics involved." "It's not just the rifle," Webb added, his tone taking on the patronizing quality of a professor addressing a confused student. "It's the whole system. At 1,000 yards, you're dealing with bullet drop measured in yards, not inches. Wind drift that can push you off target by feet. The scope alone needs to be capable of tracking that kind of elevation change." Sarah shouldered her case and turned toward the exit, but Webb's voice stopped her. "Miss," he called out, his tone friendly but with an undercurrent of condescension that made her jaw tighten. "I couldn't help but overhear. Are you really planning to attempt 1,000-yard shots with that setup?" She turned back, meeting his gaze with the neutral expression she'd perfected during countless briefings, where speaking out of turn could end. "Careers, that's the plan." Webb's smile was the kind reserved for children who announced their intention to become astronauts. "I don't mean to discourage you, but extreme-range shooting requires some pretty specialized equipment. That rifle of yours, while I'm sure it's served you well for hunting, just isn't designed for precision at those distances. The scope especially," added one of his companions, a man wearing enough tactical accessories to outfit a small army unit. "Those old hunting scopes just don't have the precision tracking needed for long-range work. You'll spend more time trying to figure out your holdovers than actually shooting." Sarah felt the familiar weight of being underestimated, a sensation that had followed her through 2 decades of military service and into civilian life. She'd learned that trying to explain usually made things worse, that credentials spoken aloud sounded like boasting, that proving competence was better done through action than words. "I appreciate the advice," she said, her voice carrying just enough politeness to avoid offense while making it clear the conversation was over. But Webb wasn't finished. He'd found an audience and a teaching moment, 2 things he'd never been able to resist combining. "Look, I run 3 gun stores, and I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm not trying to embarrass you, but 1,000-yard shooting is serious business. It requires serious equipment and serious training." He gestured toward his rifle case with the pride of a parent showing off honor roll report cards. "This rifle cost more than most people's cars, and even with all that precision engineering, consistent hits at 1,000 yards require hundreds of hours of practice and perfect conditions." The group around him nodded with the authority of men who had watched enough YouTube videos to consider themselves experts on subjects they'd rarely attempted in practice. Their confidence was infectious, building on itself until the parking lot felt heavy with certainty about what was and wasn't possible. "Maybe start at 500 yards, Webb suggested, his tone now carrying the false kindness of someone who believed they were saving another person from public embarrassment. "Work your way up gradually. Learn the fundamentals with proper equipment before you try to tackle the really challenging distances." Sarah nodded once, a gesture that could have been agreement or simple acknowledgement, then headed toward the rifle range without another word. Behind her, she heard the conversation resume with renewed energy, her departure providing fresh material for discussions about the importance of realistic expectations and proper preparation. The walk to Bay 12 took her past the shorter range shooting positions, where the crack of rifles and the ping of bullets on steel created a constant soundtrack of controlled violence. She'd always found shooting ranges oddly peaceful. The focused concentration required creating a meditation of sorts, a temporary escape from the complexities of civilian life that still felt foreign after all these years. Bay 12 sat at the far end of the complex, where the mile-long range stretched toward distant mountains that provided a dramatic backdrop for extreme distance shooting. The concrete shooting bench faced down a valley that had been carefully cleared and graded, with target stands positioned at 100-yard intervals stretching out to the mile marker dot at 1,000 yards. The targets looked like postage stamps, barely visible even with the naked eye. The wind that Santos had mentioned was indeed picking up, evidenced by the way the grass bent and swayed in patterns that told stories about air currents and pressure changes that most shooters never learned. To read, Sarah set her rifle case on the shooting bench and began the familiar ritual of preparation. Every movement was deliberate, economical, the product of thousands of repetitions that had burned efficiency into muscle memory. She'd learned long ago that precision shooting was as much about consistent preparation as it was about trigger control and ballistics knowledge. The Winchester emerged from its case like a relic being unveiled, its worn wood and weathered metal stark against the modern concrete shooting bench. Sarah's movements were methodical as she assembled her shooting position, each action performed with the kind of unconscious precision that spoke of deep familiarity. She adjusted the bipod legs with tiny movements, checking and rechecking the rifle's level against the horizon. Meanwhile, Webb's entourage had followed at a respectful distance, ostensibly to set up their own shooting positions, but clearly more interested in witnessing what they anticipated would be a humbling experience. They made no effort to hide their conversations, voices carrying across the range with the confidence of men who believed their expertise gave them the right to commentary. "Look at that scope," Webb said, pointing toward Sarah's setup with the petty casual authority of a museum guide identifying artifacts. "That's got to be 30 years old if it's a day." The glass clarity alone would make precision shooting nearly impossible at extreme range. His companion, a man named Rick Kozlov, who owned a machine shop and considered himself an expert on precision manufacturing, nodded sagely. "The tracking on those old scopes is terrible too. The internal mechanisms just weren't built to the tolerances we have today." She'd dial in her elevation and find out the scope moved her windage 3 clicks to the left. "Assuming she even knows how to calculate her ballistics," added Tom Bradley, a weekend warrior whose tactical vest bore more pouches than most soldiers carried into combat. "You can't just point and shoot at 1,000 yards. Without a ballistic calculator and proper range cards, she's basically just lobbing bullets and hoping for the best." Sarah heard every word but maintained her focus on the ritual of preparation that had kept her alive through situations these men couldn't imagine. She loaded a single round into the Winchester's chamber, the brass cartridge sliding home with the satisfying click of precision machinery. The ammunition was her own handloads, each cartridge crafted with the obsessive attention to detail that separated precision shooters from casual enthusiasts. The bullets themselves were 175-grain Sierra Match Kings, chosen not for their glamorous reputation but for their consistent performance in her grandfather's rifle. She'd spent months developing the perfect load, adjusting powder charges by fractions of grains, until she found the combination that produced the tightest groups her rifle was capable of delivering. Through her scope, the 1,000-yard target appeared as a small circle with barely visible scoring rings. The magnification brought it closer but couldn't eliminate the atmospheric distortion that made the target seem to shimmer and dance in the distance. Heat mirage rose from the sun-warmed earth, creating optical illusions that could fool even experienced shooters into misreading wind conditions. Webb had positioned himself at the adjacent shooting bench, his custom rifle resembling something from a science fiction movie compared to Sarah's utilitarian Winchester. The scope alone cost more than most people's annual salary, featuring digital displays, built-in range-finding capabilities, and ballistic computers that could calculate solutions faster than most shooters could think through the problem manually. "Watch and learn, gentlemen," Webb announced as he began his own shooting preparations. "This is how you handle extreme range shooting when you have the right equipment and training." His routine was elaborate, involving multiple electronic devices, weather stations, and reference materials that turned shooting into an engineering exercise. He consulted ballistic apps on his phone, checked atmospheric pressure readings, and made notes on a waterproof data card that looked like something from a military operations center. "Atmospheric pressure is 24.82 inches, he announced to his audience. "Temperature is 68 degrees, humidity at 31%. Wind is southwest at 9 miles per hour, gusting to 12. Density altitude puts us at about 6,200 feet effective." The numbers meant something to Webb's followers, who nodded appreciatively at his thoroughness. They understood that precision shooting involved complex calculations, multiple variables that had to be accounted for and compensated. What they didn't understand was that some shooters learn to feel these conditions rather than calculate them, to read wind and atmosphere through senses honed by experience rather than electronic measurement. Sarah made her own preparations, with less fanfare but equal precision. She didn't consult electronic devices or weather stations, instead reading the environment through methods her grandfather had taught her decades earlier. The way grass bent revealed wind direction and approximate speed. The clarity of distant objects indicated atmospheric stability. The feel of air pressure against her skin told stories about bullet flight that instruments often missed. Her shooting position was classical, borrowed from military training but refined through years of hunting in conditions that didn't allow for perfect shooting benches and controlled environments. Her body formed a stable platform. Every point of contact with the rifle carefully managed to eliminate human variables from the VI equation. The first shot was as much about gathering information as hitting the target. At extreme range, even perfect, calculations required adjustment based on what the bullet actually did versus what theory predicted it should do. Sarah's finger found the trigger, applied pressure with the steady increase that separated precision shooters from casual enthusiasts. The Winchester's report was sharp and clean, the recoil driving straight back into her shoulder without disturbing her sight picture. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's trace, a faint disturbance in the air that experienced eyes could follow to impact. The bullet struck low and right of center, missing the bullseye but hitting the target itself. Webb's group exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their expectations. A hit on the target at 1,000 yards was respectable for any rifle, but they'd anticipated complete misses, providing them with teaching moments about the importance of proper equipment and realistic expectations. Not bad for a first shot, Bradley conceded grudgingly. She actually hit the target, which is more than most people manage with hunting rifles at that distance. Still off by at least 2 feet, Kozlov observed. Without precision tracking in her scope, she'd never be able to make the corrections needed to actually center the target. Webb prepared for his own shot with ceremony, befitting what he clearly considered a demonstration of superior methodology. His rifle was a work of art, every component selected and fitted by craftsmen who specialized in extreme precision firearms. The barrel alone had cost more than most people's entire rifle setups. Manufactured to tolerances measured in fractions of thousandths of inches. His shooting position was textbook perfect, learned from competitive shooting schools and refined through weekend practice sessions. The electronic systems built into his scope had already calculated the precise adjustments needed for current conditions, displaying information in his field of view like a fighter pilot's heads-up display. The shot broke cleanly. The custom rifles report muffled by an expensive suppressor that reduced both noise and recoil to barely perceptible levels. Through his own scope, Webb tracked the bullet's flight to a hit that landed within inches of the target's center ring. "Now that," he announced with satisfaction, "is how you shoot at 1,000 yards. Proper equipment, proper training, proper technique. Everything working together to deliver precision that would be impossible with lesser gear." His audience murmured appreciation for both the shot and the lesson, clearly impressed by the demonstration of what serious equipment could accomplish in experienced hands. The contrast with Sarah's shot was exactly what Webb had hoped to illustrate, proof that success at extreme range required more than determination and good intentions. Sarah had watched Webb shot with the professional interest of someone who understood precision shooting at a level her observers couldn't appreciate. The hit was impressive, demonstrating both skill and the capabilities of modern precision equipment. But she'd also noticed details that Webb's followers missed, subtle indicators that revealed information about wind conditions and atmospheric effects that would influence her next shot. She made adjustments to her scope with the deliberate movements of someone who understood mechanical systems intimately. The clicks of the elevation and windage knobs were precise, each adjustment calculated, not through electronic assistance, but through understanding gained from thousands of rounds, fired under every conceivable condition. The second shot preparation took longer, Sarah reading conditions that had changed subtly since her first attempt. Wind patterns shifted constantly at long range, influenced by terrain features and thermal effects that created invisible rivers of air movement. The key was learning to see these patterns, to understand how they would affect bullet flight over the nearly 2 seconds it took for projectiles to reach 1,000-yard targets. Webb had begun preparing for his second shot as well, confident that he could repeat his initial success and further demonstrate the superiority of his equipment and methods. His electronic systems updated constantly, providing real-time adjustments for changing conditions that his scope's computer calculated, faster than human minds could process. The beauty of modern precision shooting, he explained to his audience, is that technology eliminates most of the guesswork. These ballistic computers account for dozens of variables simultaneously, providing solutions that would take hours to calculate manually. What he didn't mention, because he didn't understand it himself, was that some shooters learned to feel what computers calculated, to read environmental conditions through senses that evolution had refined over millions of years. Technology could enhance human capability, but it couldn't replace the intuitive understanding that came from deep experience with specific rifles under specific conditions. Sarah's second shot broke as cleanly as her first, the Winchester's trigger releasing with the crisp precision that her grandfather had spent decades perfecting through careful adjustment and maintenance. This time, her corrections proved accurate, the bullet striking significantly closer to the target's center than her initial attempt. The improvement was undeniable, visible even to casual observers who understood little about the complexities involved in extreme range shooting. Sarah had moved from a marginal hit to something approaching precision, using equipment that Webb's group had already dismissed as inadequate for serious long-range work. "Lucky correction," Kozlov muttered, though his tone suggested he was less certain than his words implied. Even broken clocks are right twice a day. But Webb was watching more carefully now, his competitive instincts recognizing something he hadn't expected to see. Sarah's shooting position remained perfectly consistent between shots, her movements economical and purposeful rather than the random adjustments of someone guessing their way toward accuracy. The third shot changed everything. Sarah's bullet struck the target's center ring with an audible impact that carried across the range, the metallic ping echoing off the surrounding hills like a bell announcing something significant. Through her ancient scope, she watched the white paint chip away from the bullseye, leaving a dark hole that marked precision shooting of the highest order. Webb's confident demeanor flickered for the first time since Sarah had arrived at the range. He lowered his binoculars slowly, double-checking what he'd just witnessed through his own high-end optics. The woman with the museum-piece rifle had just delivered a shot that would be respectable from any equipment, regardless of cost or technological sophistication. "Beginner's luck," Bradley said, but his voice carried less conviction than his words suggested. Even he understood that luck didn't account for the progression they'd just witnessed. First shot on target, second shot closer, third shot center mass. That pattern spoke of systematic correction and genuine shooting skill. Kozlov adjusted his own spotting scope, studying the target with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that didn't match his preconceptions. "Has to be a fluke. That old scope can't possibly have the precision tracking needed for corrections at that range. The mechanical tolerance just aren't there." But Sarah was already chambering her fourth round, her movements maintaining the same methodical rhythm that had characterized her shooting from the beginning. There was no celebration, no acknowledgement of the accurate shot, just the continuation of a process that seemed as natural to her as breathing. Webb found himself studying her technique with growing unease. He'd spent years learning to recognize genuine marksmanship, and what he was seeing didn't match his assumptions about what should be possible with Sarah's equipment. Her body position remained absolutely consistent, her breathing pattern controlled and deliberate, her trigger manipulation textbook perfect. The fourth shot struck within inches of her third, creating a small cluster that would be impressive from any rifle at any distance. The consistency was undeniable now, visible proof that Sarah's success wasn't accidental. She was demonstrating mastery of her equipment that contradicted everything Webb had told his audience about the necessity of modern precision gear. "That's impossible," Webb said aloud, his voice carrying a note of frustration that surprised his followers. They'd never heard uncertainty from their mentor, never seen him question the fundamental principles he'd been teaching them about equipment limitations and technical requirements. Sarah continued shooting with the steady rhythm of someone working through a familiar routine. Her fifth shot joined a growing cluster in the target center, followed by a sixth that barely opened the group's eyes. Each impact demonstrated not just accuracy, but consistency, the hallmark of genuine precision. Shooting that separated masters from enthusiasts. The transformation in Webb's group was subtle but unmistakable. Their casual commentary had faded into concentrated observation, replaced by the kind of focused attention that came from witnessing something unexpected. They'd arrived expecting to watch an educational demonstration of why proper equipment mattered, but instead found themselves confronting evidence that challenged their basic assumptions. "Maybe the target's closer than 1,000 yards, suggested Tom Bradley, grasping for explanations that would preserve his understanding of how precision shooting worked. "Range miscalibration happens sometimes. If it's actually 800 yards, those shots become a lot more explainable." Santos, the range officer, happened to be conducting his routine safety walk and overheard the speculation. "Target's at exactly 1,000 yards, he said matter-of-factly. "Laser measured and GPS verified when we set up this range. I checked the distances monthly." His confirmation eliminated the most obvious alternative explanation, forcing Webb's group to confront the reality of what they were witnessing. Sarah's ancient rifle was delivering precision that their modern equipment philosophy insisted should be impossible. Webb himself had fallen silent, his attention split between watching Sarah's continued shooting and examining his own assumptions about the relationship between equipment and performance. His custom rifle represented the pinnacle of precision shooting technology, yet the results he was seeing suggested that other factors might be more important than he'd believed. Sarah's seventh shot opened the group slightly, missing the growing cluster by perhaps 2 inches. Rather than frustration, her response was analytical, making minor adjustments to her position that suggested she understood exactly what had caused the deviation. Her eighth shot returned to the tight group, proof that the previous miss had been quickly diagnosed and corrected. "How is she making those corrections?" Kozlov asked, his machine shop background making him particularly sensitive to precision questions. "That scope doesn't have target knobs or reference marks. She's making adjustments by feel on equipment that should require precise measurement." The question highlighted something that Webb's group was only beginning to understand. Sarah's shooting process differed fundamentally from their technology-dependent methods, where they relied on electronic calculation and mechanical precision. She seemed to operate through intuition and experience that bypassed their systematic approach entirely. Her ninth shot struck the target's center ring again, followed by a 10th that completed what was becoming an impressive demonstration of sustained accuracy. The target now bore a cluster of holes that would be respectable from Bencherist, rifles costing 10 times what Sarah's Winchester was worth. Webb's phone buzzed with a text message from another member of his shooting group who had been watching from the main building through high-powered spotting scopes. "What kind of ammunition is she using? Those groups are tighter than most people manage with match-grade factory loads." The question prompted Webb to reconsider details he'd initially dismissed. Sarah's ammunition looked hand-loaded rather than factory-produced, suggesting a level of dedication to precision that contradicted her humble appearance. Serious handloaders spent hundreds of hours developing loads specifically tailored to their rifles, testing powder charges and bullet combinations until they found combinations that maximized accuracy. "Excuse me," Webb called out, his competitive curiosity finally overcoming his initial dismissiveness. "I couldn't help but notice you're shooting. Mind if I ask what ammunition you're using?" Sarah paused in her reloading process, looking up from her rifle with the neutral expression she'd maintained throughout the morning. "Handloads. 175 grain Sierra Match Kings over 43.5 grains of IMR 4064. Nothing special." The specificity of her answer revealed knowledge that Webb hadn't expected. She wasn't guessing about powder charges or bullet weights. She was reciting data that came from careful load development and extensive testing. The combination she described was a classic. Precision load, time-tested and proven effective in countless rifles. "How long did it take you to develop that load?" Webb asked, his tone shifting from condescension to genuine professional interest. "About 6 months of testing," Sarah replied. "Tried different powder charges in half-grain increments, tested different bullet seating depths, experimented with Premier brands. This combination gives me the best groups in this rifle." Her answer revealed the kind of methodical approach that serious precision shooters understood was necessary for maximum accuracy. 6 months of load development meant hundreds of test rounds, careful measurement of group sizes, and systematic variation of every component until optimal combinations emerged. Webb found himself recalculating his assessment of Sarah's capabilities. The woman he'd initially dismissed as an optimistic amateur was demonstrating knowledge and dedication that matched or exceeded his own. Her equipment might look outdated, but her approach to precision shooting showed sophistication that contradicted her humble appearance. Sarah chambered another round and returned to her shooting position, seemingly unaffected by the growing attention. Her performance was attracting. Word had spread among other shooters at the range, and small groups were beginning to gather at safe distances to observe what was becoming an impromptu exhibition of precision marksmanship. Her 11th shot struck. The target sent her ring again, maintaining the consistency that was making Webb's group increasingly uncomfortable. They'd based their entire understanding of precision shooting on the assumption that modern equipment was necessary for extreme range accuracy, but Sarah was systematically proving that assumption wrong. "Maybe she's just having an exceptional day," Bradley suggested weakly. "Everyone gets lucky sometimes. Hot streaks happen even to average shooters." But even he didn't sound convinced by his own explanation. Hot streaks didn't typically involve 11 consecutive hits at 1,000-yard distances, especially not with equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum. What they were witnessing required skill that went far beyond temporary good fortune. Santos had stopped his safety rounds to watch Sarah's shooting, recognizing precision marksmanship when he saw it. In 15 years of running Precision Ridge, he'd seen thousands of shooters attempt long-range shooting, and very few achieved the consistency Sarah was demonstrating. Her performance ranked among the best he'd ever witnessed, regardless of equipment used. "That's some fine shooting," Santos said to Webb's group, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen enough precision shooting to recognize genuine skill. "Don't see groups like that very often at this distance. Takes serious dedication to shoot that consistently." His professional assessment carried weight that Webb's group couldn't easily dismiss. Santos had no reason to exaggerate Sarah's performance. If anything, his experience made him more critical of precision shooting claims than casual observers might be. His endorsement forced them to confront the reality of what they were witnessing. Sarah's 12th shot completed a string that would be difficult to match with any equipment, regardless of cost or technological sophistication. The target bore a cluster of holes that told a story of mastery that transcended the limitations Webb's group had assumed were absolute. The silence that followed her final shot was heavy with implications that none of them wanted to acknowledge directly. Everything they'd believed about the relationship between equipment and performance had been challenged by a woman using a rifle that belonged in a hunting cabin rather than a precision shooting competition. The young range safety officer, Deputy Jessica Martinez from the county sheriff's department, had been watching Sarah's shooting from the observation tower with growing fascination. Martinez worked part-time at Precision Ridge on weekends, supplementing her law enforcement salary, while indulging her passion for marksmanship. What caught her attention wasn't just the accuracy of Sarah's shots, but something about her shooting position that looked hauntingly familiar. Martinez descended from the tower and approached the shooting line, ostensibly to conduct a routine safety check, but actually to get a closer look at the woman who was systematically dismantling assumptions about what should be possible with hunting rifle equipment. As she drew closer, details emerged that made her pulse quicken with recognition. Sarah's shooting position was flawless, but it wasn't the kind of precision learned from civilian shooting schools or weekend training courses. Her body alignment, breathing pattern, and rifle manipulation spoke of military training at the highest levels. Martinez had seen similar techniques during her time in the Marine Corps, but only among scout snipers whose skills had been honed through years of specialized training. The way Sarah loaded and fired her rifle revealed muscle memory that went beyond casual familiarity. Each movement was economical, purposeful, with the kind of efficiency that came from performing the same actions thousands of times under conditions where mistakes carried lethal consequences. Her trigger control was textbook perfect, but it was the kind of textbook that wasn't available to civilian shooters. Martinez noticed other details that Webb's group had missed in their focus on equipment specifications. Sarah's breathing pattern followed the rhythm of someone trained to shoot between heartbeats, timing her shots to coincide with the brief moment of absolute stillness that separated one breath cycle from the next. Her eyes never left the scope between shots, maintaining sight picture consistency that prevented the minor variations that degraded accuracy over multiple rounds. Most tellingly, Sarah's reaction to wind changes showed understanding that went far beyond casual observation. She wasn't just feeling the breeze on her face. She was reading grass movement, dust patterns, and atmospheric disturbances that revealed wind behavior at multiple points along the bullet's flight path. That kind of environmental awareness took years to develop and was typically associated with professional-level training. "Ma'am," Martinez said quietly, positioning herself where only Sarah could hear. "Could I speak with you for a moment when you're finished shooting?" Sarah's response was immediate and telling. Her head turned toward Martinez with the controlled alertness of someone trained to assess potential threats, her eyes conducting a rapid evaluation that took in uniform details, weapon positioning, and body language in a single glance. The assessment lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but it revealed training that civilian shooters simply didn't receive. "Of course," Sarah replied, her voice maintaining the same neutral tone she'd used all morning. But Martinez caught something else. In her response, a subtle wariness that suggested Sarah was accustomed to official attention that might not be entirely welcome. Sarah fired 3 more shots, each one maintaining the precision that had characterized her entire string. Her final round struck the target's center ring with an audible impact that carried across the range like an exclamation point, completing a demonstration that would be difficult to explain away as beginner's luck or equipment miscalibration. As Sarah began securing her rifle and collecting her brass, Martinez approached with the careful respect of one professional recognizing another. Her own military background had taught her to recognize signs that civilians rarely noticed, and everything about Sarah's shooting suggested capabilities that went far beyond recreational marksmanship. "That's some exceptional shooting," Martinez sighed, keeping her voice low enough to avoid attracting attention from Webb's increasingly agitated group. "Mind if I ask where you learned to shoot like that?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that both women understood. Martinez wasn't asking about civilian shooting schools or hunting experiences. She was asking about training that produced the kind of precision and consistency Sarah had just demonstrated. Sarah's pause before answering was brief but significant, the hesitation of someone choosing words carefully. "Here and there," she said finally. "Picked things up over the years. My grandfather taught me the basics when I was young." The response was textbook deflection, the kind of non-answer that provided information without revealing anything specific. Martinez recognized the technique because she'd used it herself when civilian curiosity probed too deeply into aspects of military service that weren't appropriate for casual discussion. "Grandfather must have been quite a teacher," Martinez observed, her tone carrying enough professional understanding to indicate she wasn't buying the casual explanation. "Those shooting positions and breathing techniques don't typically come from family hunting trips." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but Martinez noticed her eyes conducting another rapid assessment of the surrounding area, noting exit routes and potential observers with the automatic awareness of someone trained to maintain situational consciousness under all circumstances. The behavior was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who'd learned to recognize it. Meanwhile, Webb's group had been conducting their own investigation, though with less subtlety than Martinez's professional approach. Bradley had been using his phone to research information about extreme-range shooting records, trying to find explanations for what they'd witnessed that would preserve their understanding of equipment requirements. "I've been looking up 1,000-yard shooting records," Bradley announced to his companions, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who believed he'd solved a puzzle. "Some of the military snipers use really basic equipment and still make incredible shots. Maybe she's got some kind of military background we don't know about." The speculation was closer to the truth than Bradley realized, but it was delivered with the casual ignorance of someone who understood neither the rarity of such training nor the reasons why people with those skills might prefer to keep them private. Webb listened with growing unease, recognizing that his initial assumptions were becoming increasingly difficult to defend. Kozlov had been examining Sarah's target through his spotting scope, measuring group sizes and calculating statistics. That made him increasingly uncomfortable with his earlier dismissals. 12 shots in a group that measures about 4 inches at 1,000 yards, he reported grudgingly. That's better than half-minute of angle, professional-level accuracy. The numbers were undeniable, representing precision that would be impressive from any equipment, regardless of cost or technological sophistication. Webb found himself confronting the possibility that his entire understanding of the relationship between gear and performance might be fundamentally flawed. Santos had been observing the developing situation with the experienced eye of someone who'd seen every type of shooter and shooting-related drama that could unfold at a public range. He recognized the signs of a situation that might require diplomatic intervention before wounded egos led to confrontations that could disrupt the range's peaceful atmosphere. "Might want to dial back the speculation, gentlemen," Santos suggested quietly to Webb's group. "Some folks prefer to keep their backgrounds private, and it's generally best to respect that preference. This is a place for shooting, not interrogation." His advice carried the authority of someone whose word was final on range property, but it also revealed his own suspicions about Sarah's background. Santos had been around long enough to recognize when someone's capabilities significantly exceeded their apparent credentials, and he'd learned that such situations often involved histories that were best left unexplored. Martinez had been developing her own theory about Sarah's background based on details that went beyond shooting technique. The way Sarah wore her clothes suggested someone accustomed to gear that needed to function under extreme conditions rather than simply look appropriate for civilian activities. Her boots were quality footwear designed for function rather than fashion, broken in through extensive use rather than casual wear. Most significantly, Martinez had noticed scars on Sarah's hands that looked like they'd been acquired through activities more demanding than recreational shooting or hunting. The marks were old and well-healed, but they suggested exposure to harsh conditions and possibly rough treatment that went beyond normal civilian experiences. "You know," Martinez said carefully, "we get a lot of shooters here with interesting backgrounds, military, law enforcement, competitive shooting. Always nice to meet someone who really knows their way around a rifle." She was fishing for information with the skilled technique of someone trained in interview methods, offering openings for Sarah to reveal details about her background without applying direct pressure that might cause her to withdraw entirely. Sarah recognized the approach because she'd used similar techniques herself in situations where gathering information required finesse rather than direct interrogation. "There are a lot of good shooters around," she replied neutrally. "People pick up skills in all kinds of places." The response maintained the same careful distance that had characterized all of Sarah's interactions since arriving at the range. She was polite but guarded, cooperative but revelatory, engaging enough to avoid suspicion, while revealing nothing that could be used to build a complete picture of her background. Webb had been listening to the exchange with growing frustration, recognizing that his opportunity to demonstrate superior knowledge and equipment was slipping away. His entire reputation at Precision Ridge was built on being the expert who could explain shooting phenomena and provide guidance to less experienced marksmen. "Look," Webb said, his voice carrying more edge than diplomatic wisdom would have suggested. "I've been shooting competitively for 20 years, and what I just saw doesn't make sense with that equipment. Either there's something about this situation we don't understand, or we're missing some crucial information." His statement was accurate, but impolitic, putting into words the questions that had been building throughout Sarah's shooting demonstration. The challenge was implicit, but unmistakable. Either explain how you're doing what you're doing, or accept that your performance might not be entirely legitimate. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Sarah's response was to begin packing her equipment with the same methodical precision that had characterized her shooting. She wasn't hurrying, but she was clearly preparing to leave rather than engage in discussions that were becoming increasingly pointed. Martinez watched the developing tension with professional concern, recognizing the signs of a situation that could escalate beyond the bounds of appropriate range behavior. Her law enforcement training had taught her to identify moments when intervention might prevent conflicts from spiraling into more serious problems. Martinez made her decision with the swift certainty of someone trained to act when situations required immediate intervention. As Sarah continued packing her equipment with deliberate calm that suggested tactical withdrawal rather than casual departure, Martinez stepped closer and spoke in the low, urgent tone reserved for critical information sharing. "Sarah Chun," Martinez said quietly, reading the name from the range sign-in sheet she'd retrieved from the check-in building. "I ran your ID through our system while you were shooting." The name came back with some interesting flags. Sarah's hands stilled on her rifle case, the sudden cessation of movement revealing more than any verbal response could have. Her entire body language shifted imperceptibly, transitioning from casual alertness to the controlled tension of someone preparing for threats that might materialize without warning. "Your social security number shows employment history that doesn't match what most people would expect from someone who shoots like you just did," Martinez continued, her voice barely audible above the ambient range noise. 3 years at an aircraft maintenance company, 2 years at a logistics firm, 18 months at a security consulting business. Very clean, very normal, very boring. The employment history Martinez recited was exactly what it appeared to be, a carefully constructed civilian identity that would satisfy casual background checks while revealing nothing about previous activities. Sarah recognized the professional quality of the construction, understanding that Martinez had identified patterns that civilian investigators would miss entirely. The interesting part, Martinez pressed on, is what's not in your file. No college records before 2021. No credit history before that date. No social media presence extending back more than 4 years. It's like Sarah Chun didn't exist before. She started working at that aircraft maintenance company. Each observation was delivered with the precision of someone trained to analyze information for inconsistencies and gaps that revealed hidden truths. Martinez had learned to recognize constructed identities during her military service, and Sarah's background displayed all the hallmarks of professional document creation. Sarah's response was to resume packing with movements that remained controlled but carried new urgency. She understood that Martinez's investigation had uncovered enough anomalies to raise questions that couldn't be deflected with casual explanations about grandfathers and hunting experiences. The really interesting part, Martinez continued relentlessly, is that your fingerprints aren't in any civilian database, but they triggered a security flag that required special authorization to access. That kind of classification level isn't typically associated with aircraft mechanics or logistics coordinators. The revelation hung between them like a bridge that could be crossed or burned, depending on how Sarah chose to respond. Martinez had revealed enough information to demonstrate that she understood Sarah's civilian identity was constructed, while also indicating that she possessed the clearance levels necessary to access restricted information. Webb's group had been watching the interaction with growing curiosity, unable to hear the specific words, but recognizing the body language of an increasingly serious conversation. Their earlier speculation about Sarah's possible military background was beginning to seem less like random theorizing and more like accurate deduction. "You know what I think?" Martinez said, shifting her position slightly to create more privacy from potential eavesdroppers. "I think Sarah Chun is exactly who she appears to be, an aircraft mechanic who learned to shoot from her grandfather. But I also think that before Sarah Chun existed, someone else learned to shoot under circumstances that civilians don't typically encounter." The statement was carefully constructed to offer Sarah multiple response options while making it clear that Martinez understood the distinction between current identity and previous existence. It was an interrogation technique designed to gather information without creating confrontation that might cause complete withdrawal. Sarah closed her rifle case with the quiet precision that had characterized all her actions, then turned to face Martinez directly for the first time since the conversation began. The movement revealed eyes that carried the kind of depth that came from seeing things that most people couldn't imagine, experiencing situations that left permanent marks on those who survived them. "Deputy Martinez," Sarah said, using Martinez's rank and name despite never having been formally introduced. "I'm sure your training has taught you that some questions are better left unasked, and some answers are better left unspoken." The response confirmed Martinez's suspicions while simultaneously establishing boundaries that professional courtesy should respect. Sarah had acknowledged the underlying questions without providing answers that could be recorded or reported, demonstrating the kind of verbal discipline that came from extensive experience with official interrogation. "I understand completely," Martinez replied, recognizing that she'd pushed the investigation as far as productive boundaries would allow. "I just wanted you to know that if you ever need anything, law enforcement resources are available to help with situations that might arise from unresolved past complications." The offer was deliberately vague but unmistakably meaningful, indicating that Martinez understood Sarah might be living under circumstances that could require official assistance. It was the kind of professional courtesy that veterans extended to others whose service had involved classified activities with potentially lasting consequences. Meanwhile, Webb had been conducting his own research using resources available to civilian investigators. His phone calls to contacts in the competitive shooting community had yielded information that was making him increasingly uncomfortable with his earlier assessments and public statements. "I just talked to Dave Morrison at the National Rifle Association," Webb announced to his group, his voice carrying undertones of confusion and concern. He's never heard of anyone shooting groups that tight at 1,000 yards with hunting rifle equipment. Says it's theoretically possible, but practically unprecedented. The conversation with Morrison had revealed that Webb's understanding of precision shooting limitations might be less comprehensive than he'd believed. Morrison had been involved in precision shooting for 30 years and had access to performance data from thousands of competitive shooters, making his assessment particularly significant. Morrison also mentioned something interesting, Webb continued, lowering his voice to avoid carrying beyond his immediate group. He said there are rumors about military snipers who occasionally show up at civilian ranges and demonstrate capabilities that exceed normal civilian understanding. Usually, they keep low profiles and don't engage in conversations about their backgrounds. The information aligned uncomfortably well with what Webb's group had just witnessed, forcing them to consider possibilities that challenged their basic assumptions about civilian shooting capabilities and the relationship between equipment quality and performance. Kozlov had been photographing Sarah's target through his spotting scope, documenting group measurements that he wanted to verify independently before accepting their implications. The numbers were undeniable: 12 shots in a group that measured 3.8 inches, center to center at precisely 1,000 yards, representing accuracy that exceeded the mechanical capabilities that theory suggested her equipment should possess. "Math doesn't work," Kozlov muttered, studying the measurements with the frustration of someone whose engineering background demanded logical explanations for observed phenomena. That scope shouldn't have the precision tracking needed for corrections. That tight. The rifle shouldn't have the inherent accuracy potential for groups that small. His analysis was technically correct based on theoretical limitations of hunting rifle equipment, but it failed to account for variables that couldn't be measured or calculated. The human element of someone who had learned to extract maximum performance from equipment through experience that went far beyond normal civilian training. Bradley had been quietly observing Sarah's interaction with Martinez, recognizing law enforcement questioning techniques from his own brief experience with military police during his National Guard service. The conversation's intensity and Martinez's body language suggested official interest that went beyond casual curiosity about exceptional shooting performance. "Something's going on here that we don't understand," Bradley said quietly to his companions. "That deputy isn't just impressed by good shooting. She's conducting some kind of investigation, and it looks like she's found information that's making this whole situation a lot more complicated." His observation was accurate, though he couldn't appreciate the full implications of what Martinez had discovered. The security flags and classification levels associated with Sarah's identity indicated involvement with activities that remained protected long after official service had ended. Santos had been monitoring the developing situation from his position near the range office, recognizing signs that suggested potential complications beyond normal range operations. His 15 years of experience had taught him to identify when exceptional shooting performance intersected with backgrounds that might attract unwanted official attention. "Might be time to wrap this up," Santos suggested to anyone within hearing range, his tone carrying the authority of someone whose word was final on range property. "Getting late in the day, and it looks like everyone's had a chance to demonstrate their capabilities." The suggestion was diplomatic but firm, indicating that Santos preferred to conclude the shooting session before curiosity and speculation led to confrontations that could complicate his range's reputation for peaceful operation. He'd seen similar situations before and knew they could escalate unpredictably. Sarah appreciated Santos's intervention, recognizing it as professional courtesy from someone who understood that some situations were better resolved through strategic withdrawal rather than continued engagement. She shouldered her rifle case and prepared to leave with the same methodical efficiency that had characterized her entire morning at the range. "Thank you for the range time," Sarah said to Santos, her tone carrying genuine appreciation for both the facilities and his diplomatic handling of an increasingly complex situation. "The 1,000-yard range is excellent, very well maintained." Her compliment was sincere, but also served to redirect conversation toward neutral topics that wouldn't invite further speculation about her background or capabilities. Santos nodded. Acknowledgement, understanding that some customers preferred to maintain privacy about their previous experiences and training. Martinez watched Sarah's departure preparations with the mixed feelings of someone whose professional curiosity had been both satisfied and frustrated. She'd confirmed her suspicions about Sarah's background while simultaneously learning that some questions couldn't be answered through normal investigative methods. As Sarah walked toward the parking lot, Webb's group remained at the shooting line, staring at the target that bore evidence of precision shooting that contradicted their fundamental assumptions about equipment, requirements, and civilian capabilities. The afternoon had challenged their understanding in ways that would require significant adjustment to their established beliefs about marksmanship and the relationship between gear and performance. The parking lot confrontation began when Webb intercepted Sarah halfway to her truck, his professional composure finally cracking under the weight of questions that demanded answers. His followers trailed behind like a tactical formation, their earlier casual observation replaced by the focused intensity of men whose fundamental beliefs had been challenged by evidence they couldn't dismiss. "Hold on," Webb called out, his voice carrying across the gravel with enough volume to attract attention from other departing shooters. "You can't just walk away after what we witnessed in there. That shooting performance demands some kind of explanation." Sarah paused beside her truck, her hand resting on the door handle, while she evaluated the developing situation with the automatic threat assessment that had become second nature during years of operations in hostile territory. 5 men approaching. In loose formation, voices raised, body language suggesting confrontation rather than casual conversation. "I'm not sure what kind of explanation you're looking for," Sarah replied, her tone maintaining the same neutral professionalism she'd displayed throughout the morning. "I shot at targets, hit most of them. Seems fairly straightforward." But Webb was beyond accepting deflections, his reputation and self-image too invested in understanding precision shooting to let the matter rest without resolution. "Straightforward?" he repeated, his voice rising with frustration. "Lady, you just shot a sub-4-inch group at 1,000 yards with equipment that shouldn't be capable of half that precision. That's not straightforward. That's impossible." The declaration drew nods of agreement from his companions, who had spent the afternoon watching their understanding of marksmanship fundamentals crumble under the weight of empirical evidence. Their collective certainty about equipment requirements and technical limitations had been systematically dismantled by Sarah's performance. Martinez emerged from the range building in time to witness the confrontation developing in the parking lot, her law enforcement instincts immediately recognizing a situation that could escalate beyond verbal disagreement if not managed carefully. She approached with the controlled urgency of someone trained to de-escalate tensions before they reached critical thresholds. "Gentlemen," Martinez called out, her voice carrying the authoritative tone that commanded attention without necessarily provoking additional conflict. "This is still a range property, and we maintain certain standards of conduct here. Let's keep things civil." But Webb was too committed to his course of action to accept official intervention without getting answers that would restore his comprehension of precision shooting fundamentals. "Deputy, you saw what happened there. That woman just delivered a shooting performance that contradicts everything we know about long-range marksmanship. We have a right to understand how that's possible." His appeal to Martinez revealed the depth of his confusion and frustration. The genuine bewilderment of someone whose expertise had been challenged in ways that demanded explanation. Webb wasn't simply being difficult. He was struggling to reconcile observed reality with established knowledge that had guided his understanding for decades. Sarah recognized the pattern because she'd encountered it countless times during her transition to civilian life. People whose identities were built around specific expertise couldn't easily accept evidence that contradicted their fundamental assumptions, especially when that evidence came from sources they'd initially dismissed as inferior. "Mr. Webb," Sarah said quietly, using his name despite never having been formally introduced. "Sometimes the difference between possible and impossible is just experience you haven't had yet. My grandfather spent 60 years learning to shoot, and he passed along what he learned. That's all." The explanation was carefully constructed to provide a plausible answer while revealing nothing about experiences that couldn't be discussed. In civilian settings, Sarah had learned to navigate such conversations during 3 years of civilian employment, always walking the line between honesty and operational security. Kozlov's engineering background made him skeptical of explanations that relied on unmeasurable variables like experience and tradition. "That's not how physics works," he said with the confidence of someone who trusted mathematical principles more than anecdotal claims. "Mechanical precision has measurable limits. Equipment accuracy can be calculated and verified." His technical objection represented the core of Webb's group's confusion. Their understanding was based on theoretical limitations that Sarah's performance had apparently violated. They needed explanations that fit within established frameworks of knowledge, not appeals to intangible factors like experience and instinct. Santos had followed the confrontation to the parking lot, recognizing his responsibility to prevent situations on range property from escalating beyond verbal disagreement. His position required maintaining peace among customers while respecting everyone's right to express their opinions, a diplomatic balance that demanded careful management. "Folks," Santos said with the weary authority of someone who'd mediated countless disagreements between shooters with different philosophies and capabilities. "This is getting a bit heated for a discussion about marksmanship. Maybe we should all take a step back and remember we're here because we love shooting, not because we need to prove points about equipment or experience." His intervention was diplomatically phrased but carried the implicit threat of official action if the situation continued escalating. Santos had the authority to ban customers from range property, and his tone suggested he wasn't reluctant to exercise that authority if necessary to maintain order. Webb found himself trapped between his need for answers and the growing recognition that his pursuit of those answers was creating problems that could affect his standing at Precision Ridge. The range was important to his business and his reputation. Alienating Santos over a single shooting demonstration would be professionally counterproductive. "Look," Webb said, modifying his tone to sound more reasonable while maintaining his fundamental position, "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to understand what we witnessed today. That level of precision shooting has implications that go beyond casual marksmanship." Sarah understood that Webb's persistence stemmed from genuine confusion rather than simple stubbornness, but she also recognized that providing the explanations he sought would require revealing information that couldn't be shared. Her background involved classified activities that remained protected regardless of how much time had passed since her official service ended. "Mr. Webb," she said with the patient tone of someone who'd learned to deflect persistent questions without creating additional conflict, "some things in life can't be easily explained or replicated. Sometimes you just have to accept that people have different experiences and capabilities." The response was as close to an admission as Webb was likely to receive, acknowledging that Sarah's capabilities stemmed from experiences that couldn't be fully shared while avoiding any specific claims about training or background that might invite further investigation. Martinez had been monitoring the conversation with growing concern about its direction and implications. Her earlier investigation had revealed enough classified flags to understand that Sarah's background involved activities that remained sensitive, making public speculation about her capabilities potentially problematic for multiple parties. "I think this conversation has gone as far as it productively can," Martinez said with the finality of someone whose professional judgment concluded that continued discussion would create more problems than solutions. "Everyone's made their points, and it's time to move on." The revelation came from an unexpected source. Bradley, who had been quietly using his phone throughout the confrontation, suddenly looked up with an expression that combined recognition with something approaching awe. His National Guard service had given him access to military databases that civilian investigators couldn't reach, and a name search had finally yielded results that explained everything. "Chun," Bradley said quietly, his voice carrying a note of reverence that immediately changed the atmosphere in the parking lot. "Sarah Chun. I knew that name sounded familiar. There's a classified after-action report from Afghanistan, 2019. Operation Silent Thunder." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, her carefully maintained composure cracking for the first time since arriving at Precision Ridge. Operation Silent Thunder was supposed to be buried so deep that even military personnel with appropriate clearances wouldn't casually encounter references to it in standard databases. Martinez immediately understood the significance of Bradley's discovery, her own military background providing context that civilians would miss entirely. Classified operations that remained restricted years after completion typically involved activities that had strategic implications far beyond normal military engagements. "Bradley," Martinez said sharply, her law enforcement training recognizing a situation that could spiral beyond manageable boundaries. "Whatever you think you've found, this isn't the place to discuss it. Some information stays classified for good reasons. But the damage was already done." Webb's group had heard enough to understand that Sarah's background involved military activities that remained officially sensitive, providing the explanation they'd been seeking while simultaneously revealing why that explanation couldn't be openly discussed. Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. She moved toward Bradley with the controlled aggression of someone trained to neutralize threats before they could fully develop, her civilian facade dropping away to reveal capabilities that Webb's group had never imagined they might encounter. "Put the phone away," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying undertones that made Bradley step backward instinctively. "Whatever you think you've found, you're wrong. And even if you weren't wrong, discussing classified material in civilian settings is a federal crime." The transformation was startling in its completeness. The quiet woman who had patiently endured their speculation and challenges had been replaced by someone whose presence projected competence and danger in equal measure. Webb found himself understanding for the first time that they might have seriously misjudged the situation they'd created. Bradley's hands trembled slightly as he closed his phone application, finally grasping that his casual investigation had uncovered information that carried serious legal and security implications. His National Guard clearance had given him access to databases that he'd never fully understood the sensitivity of until this moment. "I'm sorry," Bradley said, his earlier confidence completely evaporating. "I didn't realize. I was just trying to understand. I didn't mean to access anything I shouldn't have seen." His apology revealed the genuine confusion of someone who had stumbled into complexities far beyond his understanding or clearance level. The National Guard database access he'd used for casual research was never intended for investigating civilian identities connected to classified operations. Santos recognized that the situation had escalated beyond normal range management issues and was now involving matters that could attract federal attention to his facility. His 15 years of operating Precision Ridge had taught him to identify situations that required immediate resolution before they created lasting problems. "This conversation ends now," Santos declared with the absolute authority of someone whose property rights gave him final say over all activities at Precision Ridge. Everyone needs to leave immediately, and this discussion never happened. I don't want to hear about classified operations or military backgrounds or anything else that could bring federal investigators to my range. His intervention was motivated by practical concerns rather than patriotic sentiment, but it aligned perfectly with Sarah's need to contain a situation that threatened to expose information that remained protected regardless of how much time had passed since her official service ended. Webb struggled to process the implications of what he'd learned while simultaneously recognizing that his pursuit of answers had led his group into territory where continued investigation could create serious legal problems. His business reputation depended on maintaining positive relationships with law enforcement and avoiding any activities that might attract unwanted official attention. "We should go," Webb said to his companions, his voice carrying the defeat of someone who had finally understood that some questions couldn't be answered without creating consequences that far outweighed the satisfaction of knowing. "This whole thing has gotten way out of hand." Kozlov and the others nodded agreement, their earlier curiosity replaced by the uncomfortable realization that their speculation about Sarah's background had touched on matters that remained officially sensitive. None of them had clearances or legitimate reasons to access information about classified military operations. Martinez watched the group's withdrawal with relief, recognizing that civilian curiosity about military matters could create complications that extended far beyond local law enforcement jurisdiction. Her own clearance levels had taught her to identify situations where ignorance was preferable to knowledge that carried obligations she wasn't prepared to accept. Sarah remained beside her truck until Webb's group had departed, her situational awareness maintaining vigilance until potential threats had moved beyond immediate range. The afternoon had demonstrated that her carefully constructed civilian identity remained vulnerable to investigation by people with access to information that should have been better protected. "You okay?" Martinez asked quietly, recognizing signs of stress that came from having protected information exposed through channels that shouldn't have provided access to classified materials. Her own military experience had taught her to appreciate the psychological burden carried by people whose service involved activities that couldn't be acknowledged. "I'm fine," Sarah replied, though her voice carried undertones that suggested the afternoon's events had been more unsettling than she wanted to admit. "Just reminds me why I prefer to keep things simple these days." The response revealed the ongoing challenge faced by veterans whose service involved classified activities, the impossibility of completely escaping their past while trying to build civilian lives that didn't invite unwanted attention or investigation. Santos approached with the business card of a security consultant who specialized in helping veterans with sensitive backgrounds navigate civilian life without compromising operational security. "Might be worth a conversation," he suggested quietly. "Some folks find it helpful to have professional advice about managing situations like this." His offer was motivated by genuine concern rather than business considerations, recognizing that Sarah's situation represented ongoing vulnerabilities that could affect both her personal security and his range's reputation if not properly managed. As Sarah drove away from Precision Ridge, she reflected on the afternoon's events with the analytical mindset that had kept her alive through operations that officially never happened. The exposure of her capabilities had been manageable, but Bradley's access to classified information revealed security gaps that could create future problems. The challenge of maintaining her civilian identity while preserving the skills that defined her remained as complex as ever, requiring constant vigilance and careful management of situations that could spiral beyond her control without warning. 3 months later, the transformation of Precision Ridge's culture had become undeniable. Sarah's demonstration had rippled through the shooting community like stones dropped in still water, creating changes that extended far beyond what anyone could have anticipated from a single afternoon's shooting. The story had spread through informal networks, growing in the telling but somehow never losing its essential truth. Sometimes the most extraordinary capabilities came disguised in the most ordinary packages. Webb had undergone perhaps the most dramatic change of all. His encounter with Sarah had forced him to confront fundamental assumptions about the relationship between equipment and performance that had guided his entire approach to precision shooting. The custom rifles and expensive optics that had once defined his identity as an expert marksman now seemed less like essential tools and more like expensive compensations for skills he'd never fully developed. He'd begun seeking out older shooters, men and women who had learned their craft before the advent of computerized ballistics and precision-engineered equipment. Their stories revealed a different philosophy of marksmanship, one that emphasized understanding over technology, experience over engineering. Webb started practicing with simpler equipment, trying to develop the intuitive connection with rifle and environment that Sarah had demonstrated so effortlessly. The changes weren't just philosophical. Webb's shooting improved dramatically once he stopped relying entirely on electronic assistance and began developing the environmental awareness that separated masters from technicians. He learned to read wind through grass movement and atmospheric disturbance, to feel barometric pressure changes through his skin, to time his shots to natural rhythms that no computer could calculate. Martinez had used her law enforcement contacts to conduct discreet research into veterans with sensitive backgrounds who had transitioned to civilian life. What she discovered was a hidden community of men and women whose service had involved activities that remained classified. People who had sacrificed not just years of their lives, but their very identities in service of missions that could never be publicly acknowledged. Her investigation revealed that Sarah's situation was far from unique. Across the country, former special operations personnel worked ordinary jobs while carrying extraordinary skills and experiences that they could never fully share. They were mechanics and teachers, security guards and office workers, invisible guardians whose true capabilities remained hidden beneath carefully constructed civilian personas. This discovery led Martinez to establish an informal network of veterans in her county, providing secure communication channels and mutual support for people whose backgrounds made them vulnerable to unwanted attention or investigation. The group met monthly at different locations, sharing information about security concerns and offering assistance to members who faced challenges related to their classified pasts. Santos had quietly implemented new policies at Precision Ridge, designed to protect shooters whose capabilities might attract unwanted attention. He established private shooting times for individuals who preferred to avoid public observation, created secure storage for equipment that might reveal more about its owners than civilian curiosity should discover, and trained his staff to recognize situations where discretion was more valuable than publicity. The changes transformed Precision Ridge from a typical public shooting range into something approaching a sanctuary for people whose skills exceeded normal civilian parameters. Word spread through networks that civilians never accessed, drawing visitors who appreciated Santos's understanding that some capabilities were better demonstrated privately than publicly. Bradley's unauthorized access to classified databases had resulted in a comprehensive security review that revealed systemic vulnerabilities in military information systems. His National Guard unit faced restrictions on database access that would prevent future security breaches, while Bradley himself underwent additional training on the proper handling of classified information and the legal implications of unauthorized research. The incident had taught him valuable lessons about the responsibilities that came with security clearances, even limited ones. He developed a new appreciation for the challenges faced by veterans whose service had involved activities that remained sensitive years or decades after their completion, understanding that curiosity about such matters could create serious problems. for all parties involved. Young shooters began arriving at Precision Ridge with different expectations and attitudes than previous generations. They came seeking instruction in fundamental marksmanship skills rather than recommendations for expensive equipment, understanding that true precision shooting required capabilities that couldn't be purchased from catalogs or downloaded from applications. Sarah occasionally returned to the range, always during off-peak hours when her presence wouldn't attract the kind of attention that had complicated her previous visit. She worked with a small group of serious students, teaching techniques that couldn't be found in civilian shooting manuals or competitive training programs. Her instruction focused on developing the environmental awareness and intuitive connection. With equipment that separated functional marksmen from true masters, these teaching sessions were conducted with the understanding that certain subjects would never be directly addressed. Students learned advanced techniques through practical demonstration rather than theoretical explanation, developing capabilities that would serve them well without ever learning the specific contexts in which those capabilities had been originally developed. The ripple effects extended beyond Precision Ridge into the broader shooting community. Equipment manufacturers began receiving requests for simpler, more robust products that emphasized function over complexity. Competitive shooters started experimenting with basic equipment, discovering that technological assistance had been masking fundamental skill deficiencies that limited their true potential. Shooting schools across the region modified their curricula to include more emphasis on environmental awareness and intuitive marksmanship, recognizing that their previous focus on equipment and technology had been producing technically competent shooters who lacked the deeper understanding that enabled true precision under challenging conditions. Sarah's story had become legend within certain circles, told and retold with the kind of reverence reserved for tales that revealed fundamental truths about capability and character. The details varied in the telling, but the essential message remained constant. The most extraordinary abilities often came disguised in the most ordinary appearances, and true expertise could never be fully measured by external indicators. Afternoon at Precision Ridge had demonstrated that heroism and exceptional capability didn't always announce themselves with medals and recognition. Sometimes the most remarkable people were those who chose invisibility over acclaim, who found satisfaction in quiet competence rather than public acknowledgement of their extraordinary abilities. In the end, Sarah's mile-long shot had accomplished something far more significant than simply hitting a distant target. It had reminded everyone who witnessed it that the world contained hidden depths of capability and character that couldn't be easily categorized or dismissed, that the most powerful demonstrations of human potential often came from the most unexpected sources. 6 months after the legendary shooting demonstration, Sarah's influence had spread far beyond the confines of Precision Ridge, creating a network of quiet excellence that spanned multiple states and countless lives. The story of the woman with the ancient scope had become a catalyst for change in communities, where precision shooting intersected with deeper questions about capability, respect, and the hidden potential that existed in ordinary people. Veterans across Colorado began finding their way to shooting ranges where Sarah's story had taken root, drawn by whispered accounts of a place where extraordinary capabilities could be demonstrated without triggering unwanted investigations or compromising carefully maintained civilian identities. These men and women carried their own secrets, their own classified histories, their own struggles with transitioning from missions that officially never happened to lives that felt perpetually incomplete. At a range outside Denver, a former Air Force pararescue specialist named David Kim watched newcomers attempt long-range shooting with equipment that cost more than his annual salary. Kim had spent 8 years jumping into hostile territory to save downed pilots, developing shooting skills under conditions that civilian competitors couldn't imagine. His transition to civilian life had been complicated by the inability to explain how he'd learned capabilities that exceeded normal training parameters, The story of Sarah's demonstration gave Kim permission to share his own expertise without revealing the classified context in which it had been developed. He began teaching fundamental marksmanship skills to young shooters, who arrived expecting equipment recommendations, but left understanding that true precision required capabilities that couldn't be purchased or downloaded. Similar transformations occurred at ranges throughout the region as other veterans emerged from self-imposed isolation, inspired by Sarah's example to contribute their knowledge without compromising their security. Former Special Operations personnel, who had spent years hiding their capabilities, discovered they could teach advanced techniques through practical demonstration rather than theoretical explanation. The movement grew organically, spreading through informal networks that connected people whose backgrounds couldn't be openly discussed, but whose expertise could be quietly shared. Range owners learned to recognize the signs of instructors whose knowledge exceeded their apparent credentials, creating environments where exceptional teaching could occur without attracting the kind of attention that might complicate everyone's security. Martinez had expanded her veteran support network into a formal, nonprofit organization that provided resources and assistance to former military personnel whose classified backgrounds created ongoing challenges in civilian life. The organization operated with deliberate obscurity, helping people navigate employment, housing, and legal issues that arose from having histories that couldn't be fully verified or explained. Her work revealed the scope of challenges faced by people whose service had involved activities that remained sensitive years or decades after completion. Employment applications that couldn't be honestly filled out without revealing classified information. Background checks that triggered security flags. References who couldn't be contacted without compromising ongoing operations. The organization developed resources to help veterans construct legitimate civilian identities that would satisfy normal scrutiny while protecting information that needed to remain classified. Legal assistance, employment guidance, and psychological support for people whose greatest achievements could never be publicly acknowledged or celebrated. Webb's transformation had continued evolving, his entire approach to precision shooting fundamentally altered by his encounter with Sarah's capabilities. He'd sold most of his expensive equipment, replacing it with simpler, more robust gear that emphasized function over technological sophistication. His shooting improved dramatically as he learned to develop capabilities that he'd previously tried to substitute with expensive solutions. More significantly, Webb had begun teaching a different philosophy of marksmanship that emphasized understanding over equipment, experience over engineering. His students learned to read environmental conditions through observation rather than electronic measurement, to develop intuitive connections with their rifles that enabled precision under conditions where technological assistance failed. His gun stores had evolved to serve customers seeking functional equipment rather than status symbols, offering products that emphasized reliability and effectiveness over cosmetic appeal or technological complexity. The changes attracted a different clientele, serious shooters who appreciated quality gear designed for performance rather than impressive specifications. Santos had transformed Precision Ridge into something approaching a pilgrimage destination for shooters seeking instruction that couldn't be found through normal civilian channels. The range operated with careful discretion, protecting the privacy of instructors whose backgrounds required confidentiality while providing access to knowledge that could significantly advance students' capabilities. The facility had developed specialized programs that attracted participants from across the country, people seeking advanced training that bridged the gap between civilian marksmanship and professional level precision shooting. These programs operated with understanding that certain subjects would never be directly addressed, that learning would occur through practical demonstration rather than theoretical explanation. Monthly gatherings brought together shooters whose capabilities exceeded normal civilian parameters, creating opportunities for knowledge sharing that couldn't occur in public settings. These events operated within formal security protocols that protected participants while enabling advanced instruction in techniques that weren't available through commercial training programs. Young people began arriving at shooting ranges with different expectations and attitudes, seeking mentorship from instructors whose knowledge clearly exceeded their apparent credentials. They understood that the most valuable teaching often came from people whose backgrounds couldn't be fully explained, whose expertise had been developed through experiences that remained classified. These students learned advanced techniques through practical application rather than theoretical study, developing capabilities that would serve them throughout their lives without ever fully understanding the contexts in which those techniques had been originally developed. They emerged as more capable shooters and more thoughtful individuals, understanding that true expertise often remained hidden beneath ordinary appearances. The cultural changes extended beyond shooting sports into broader discussions about capability, respect, and the recognition that extraordinary potential often existed in unexpected places. Sarah's demonstration had reminded communities that heroism and excellence didn't always announce themselves through obvious indicators, that the most remarkable people often chose invisibility over acclaim. Law enforcement agencies began modifying their training programs to include instruction from veterans, whose backgrounds remained classified, but whose expertise could significantly enhance officer capabilities. These programs operated with careful attention to security requirements, while providing access to knowledge that could save lives in critical situations. The transformation had created a new understanding of the relationship between service and recognition, between capability and acknowledgement. Sarah's choice to remain invisible while continuing to serve had inspired others to find ways of contributing their knowledge without seeking credit or public appreciation for their efforts. 2 years after that legendary afternoon at Precision Ridge, Sarah Chun had become something more than a person. She had become a symbol, a reminder that the most extraordinary capabilities often walked among us wearing the most ordinary masks. The story of her mile-long shot had evolved into something approaching modern folklore, told and retold wherever serious shooters gathered, each version carrying the same essential truth about hidden excellence and the power of underestimation. On a crisp autumn morning, Sarah returned to Precision Ridge for what would become her final public demonstration. Word had spread through the veteran networks that she planned to attempt something unprecedented, a shot at the range's newly constructed mile-and-a-half target, a distance that pushed beyond the boundaries of what even military snipers typically attempted under field conditions. The gathering was different this time. No casual observers, no weekend warriors seeking entertainment. The spectators were serious students of marksmanship, many of them veterans whose own backgrounds remained carefully guarded secrets. They understood that they were witnessing something that transcended typical shooting demonstrations, a moment when legend intersected with living reality. Webb arrived early, carrying a simple bolt-action rifle that looked remarkably similar to Sarah's grandfather's Winchester. His transformation over the previous 2 years had been complete. His entire philosophy of precision shooting rebuilt around principles of fundamental skill rather than technological dependency. He'd become one of Sarah's most dedicated students. Though their teacher-student relationship was never formally acknowledged, Martinez had brought members of her veteran support organization, men and women who had found purpose in helping others navigate the complex challenges of transitioning from classified service to civilian life. The organization had grown into a regional network that provided assistance to hundreds of former military personnel whose backgrounds created ongoing security and employment challenges. Santos had prepared the range with ceremonial attention to detail, understanding that the day's events would become part of Precision Ridge's permanent legacy. The facility had evolved into something approaching a shrine for serious marksmen, a place where exceptional capabilities could be demonstrated without compromising the security of those who possessed them. The rifle Sarah carried looked identical. to the one she'd used 2 years earlier. But careful observers noticed subtle differences that spoke of meticulous preparation. The stock showed signs of minor modifications that improved ergonomics without altering the weapon's fundamental character. The scope remained the same ancient Leupold, but it had been recently serviced with attention to detail that bordered on obsession. Her ammunition was the product of months of development, each cartridge hand-loaded with precision that exceeded commercial manufacturing standards. The bullets were custom-made projectiles designed specifically for extreme-range performance, their construction representing knowledge gained through experiences that couldn't be publicly discussed. The target at 1,500 yards appeared as little more than a dot, even through high-powered spotting scopes, its presence at the edge of visual range serving as a reminder of the distance that separated intention from impact. Atmospheric conditions were challenging, with variable winds and thermal currents that would test every aspect of Sarah's knowledge and experience. As Sarah prepared for her shot, the gathered spectators fell into reverent silence, understanding that they were witnessing something that transcended typical demonstrations of marksmanship. This was about more than hitting a distant target. It was about proving that human capability could exceed technological limitation, that experience and determination could accomplish what theoretical constraints suggested was impossible. Her preparation ritual remained unchanged from 2 years earlier, each movement deliberate and economical, the product of thousands of repetitions that had burned efficiency into muscle memory. She read atmospheric conditions through senses honed by experiences that had demanded precision under circumstances where failure carried lethal consequences. The shot, when it came, seemed almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. The Winchester's report echoed across the range with the same sharp crack that had announced her first legendary demonstration. But this time the silence that followed carried weight that seemed to compress the very air around the gathered observers. Through spotting scopes, the impact was confirmed. A direct hit on the 1,500-yard target, delivered with equipment that theoretical limitations insisted couldn't achieve such precision. The demonstration was complete, proof that human capability could transcend technological constraint when experience and determination aligned with purpose. But the real significance of the moment lay not in the achievement itself, but in what it represented about the nature of excellence and the power of hidden potential. Sarah had reminded everyone present that the most extraordinary capabilities often remained invisible until circumstances demanded their revelation. As the spectators departed, many of them carried more than memories of exceptional marksmanship. They carried understanding that excellence came in many forms, that the most remarkable achievements often occurred without fanfare or recognition, that true service could be measured in quiet competence rather than public acclaim. Sarah's legacy had become something larger than individual achievement. She had inspired a movement that valued substance over appearance, capability over credentials, service over recognition. Veterans across the region had found new purpose in sharing their knowledge without seeking credit, in contributing their expertise while maintaining the anonymity that their backgrounds required. Young shooters who had learned under Sarah's indirect influence carried forward not just improved marksmanship skills, but deeper understanding of respect, humility, and the recognition that wisdom often came from unexpected sources. They would become teachers themselves, passing on techniques and philosophies that emphasized character development alongside technical competence. The cultural transformation had spread beyond shooting sports into broader discussions about capability and recognition, about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to discover the extraordinary potential that existed in ordinary people. Sarah's example had reminded communities that heroism didn't always announce itself through obvious indicators. On the drive home from Precision Ridge, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from classified operations to public demonstration, from official invisibility to legendary status within communities that valued excellence over recognition. Her grandfather's rifle rode beside her, its worn wood and weathered metal, carrying stories that would continue inspiring others long after her own service had ended. The mile-and-a-half shot had been her final public demonstration, a capstone, achievement that would become part of shooting sports folklore. But her true legacy lay in the network of excellence she had inspired, the community of hidden champions who continued serving without seeking recognition, who found satisfaction in quiet competence rather than public acclaim. Sarah Chun would return to her ordinary life, working her civilian job and maintaining her carefully constructed anonymity. But the ripple effects of her influence would continue spreading, touching lives and inspiring excellence in ways that could never be fully measured or acknowledged. In the end, that invisible impact was exactly what she had always intended. Years passed, and Sarah's legend grew in whispers rather than headlines. She continued her quiet work, training a select few who understood that true mastery meant serving without seeking glory. Her grandfather's rifle remained her constant companion, its ancient scope still outperforming the equipment costing thousands more. The veterans she had inspired went on to train others, creating an invisible network of excellence that spanned the country. Martinez's organization expanded internationally, helping former operators worldwide transition to civilian life while preserving their ability to serve when called upon. Webb became one of the most respected instructors in the region, teaching a philosophy that emphasized character over equipment. Santos eventually retired, passing Precision Ridge to a former student of Sarah's who maintained the facility's reputation as a sanctuary for those whose capabilities exceeded their apparent credentials. The range became a pilgrimage site for serious marksmen, a place where legends were born through quiet demonstration rather than boastful claims. On quiet mornings at the range, when mist still clung to the distant mountains, some said you could still see a lone figure with an ancient rifle, reminding the world that the most extraordinary achievements often came from the most unlikely sources. True heroes, they learned, didn't need recognition. They needed only purpose, precision, and the wisdom to know that the greatest victories were often invisible to those they protected. Sarah's story became proof that excellence recognizes no boundaries of age, gender, or equipment cost. In a world obsessed with appearances, she reminded us to look deeper, to respect quiet competence, and to understand that the most remarkable people often choose to remain hidden in plain sight. What incredible story of hidden talent have you witnessed in your own life? Have you ever underestimated someone based on appearances, only to discover their extraordinary capabilities? Share your experiences in the comments below. We love hearing from our amazing community of viewers around the world. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join our family of everyday heroes who believe that the most inspiring stories often come from the most unexpected places. Every week, we bring you real tales of courage, determination, and the hidden champions walking among us. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful reminders that extraordinary potential exists in ordinary people everywhere.